Good evening and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Rebecca Munro and this is Scotland at 7. And today I am joined by Brian Liddy. Brian, how are you this evening?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's no problem at all. Well, we'll start with our daily coronavirus update first and then we'll get on to the questioning. So, as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 2,413,088 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,077,122 have been confirmed negative. 335,966 have tested positive. There are 1,825 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 22 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 7,842. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 488 were in hospital last night, 58 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 3,989,927 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 3,028,271 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show 128,980 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 80 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. We'll move on to our first story of this evening, and that is that a new report warns Shared Prosperity Fund risks undermining devolution. The UK Government Shared Prosperity Fund has come under further criticism today after the Institute for Government warned that Boris Johnson's plans risk further damaging the union. In its new report, the IFG called on the UK Government to take an approach that respects the devolution settlements and takes into account the devolved government's existing role in administrating structural funds. It warned that failure to do so risks further damaging trust between the UK and devolved governments, and it could undermine the union. The SNP have warned that Tories in Westminster having control of Scotland's money before devolution led to cuts and not extra cash, and now they are already slashing spending for English local councils. So Brian, the UK Government plans to replace EU structural funds with a new UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Do you think that the UK Government will ever match the funding by the EU to Scotland?
I don't think they will. What can I say? I just don't think that Westminster can be trusted to do what the European Union used to do for the devolved nations. When we were in the European Union, we had a good deal. Yes, we contributed a lot of money, but areas like Scotland and Northern Ireland used to get a lot of money back in return. So it was almost like being in a cooperative in a sense. Would Westminster act in the same kind of cooperative manner? I really don't think so. What more can I say?
No, that's good. That is good. I'll move on to the next question, and that's that, in Scotland, the European Regional Development Fund and the European Social Fund gave Scotland €180 per citizen. I mean, this was essential in rural areas, particularly for infrastructure. But is there a possibility that the UK Government could give more funding to Conservative areas?
Yes, and I think when you interviewed Chris Law the other day, he used an expression which I thought was extremely fitting. He called it pork barrel politics, which I thought was the perfect way to describe what we're facing. Because yes, Tory MPs, Conservative MPs, they will simply divert funds to areas where there are Tory voters. So areas where there are mainly left-wing, where there's perhaps more poverty and neglect, will probably find it's harder to fight for the funds that are available. Again, I just don't think that the government can be trusted to be fair on this matter. They have done it in the past. I think it's already happened in the north of England when what was known as the Red Wall, constituencies that were left-leaning in Labour voting for many, many years, recently in the most recent general election decided to to vote Conservative and turn blue. And straight away, then those constituencies, they set up a system whereby, forgive me because I don't know the name of it, but they set up a system whereby if an MP wanted to ask for funding they couldn't ask for funding for their own area. Right. They had to nominate a second area. And so what you found was Tory MPs nominating each other's areas and not nominating a Liberal Democrat or a Labour voting constituency. So they have form, and indeed it's probably their plan, I think.
Yeah, well,
Call me a cynic.
We also know that the Conservatives have recently tinkered with electoral boundaries to swing seats in their favour, and we also know that John Major's Conservative government hijacked money, that was supposed to go to Scotland, but instead went to appease his waning support in South East England. I mean, are we now at the financial behest of London?
Perhaps, but I hope that that the SNP can find some way to tackle this situation. And you mentioned boundary changes. Again, I'm not a boundary expert by any manner of means, but I'm not a psephologist in any way. But if my understanding is correct, there in Wales and in Scotland and probably in Northern Ireland, that there are going to be less MPs, less constituencies, meaning less MPs at Westminster. Whereas in England, they're going to create more constituencies, which will mean more MPs. So that imbalance that we have at the moment, that deficit between the fact that no matter how Scotland votes, it will always be outnumbered by English MPs, then that's going to be exacerbated, and it's going to become even easier for the government, for an English government to get what it wants. But I'm conscious now that I'm probably not answering your question. Are we at the financial behest of London? Yes. Again, it's staggering. What can I say? My only hope is that the devolved nations are able to find some way to tackle it. And
yeah, I mean, so do you agree then with Mary Black, who says that the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is a UK power grab?
Absolutely. These are funds that normally would have been passed directly to Scotland from the EU. Now that we're no longer in the European Union, Westminster say that they will plug the gap, but and they certainly say that they will be spending money. Westminster's plan is not to give money to the devolved parliaments to use in the way that they see fit. They're going to bypass that usual route and give money, and they would perhaps decide that they want to build a bridge somewhere, or broadband, I'm thinking is, but so basically, Scottish Parliament has just been cut out of the equation entirely, and as I said, Westminster, I don't think, can be trusted to do the right thing when it comes to this money. There was an interesting parallel recently with broadband. Broadband is reserved, I believe, and is the responsibility of the Westminster government. They said that they would improve broadband to remote communities here in Scotland, and they were failing to deliver that, and so the Scottish government just stepped in and started to invest in broadband and produce better broadband to the Highlands and Islands. And that's the kind of, and when I say that, I hope that the SNP or the Scottish government can find some way to counter the plans that Westminster have. Then that this is the kind of thing that I'm hoping that they'll be able to do, that they'll basically just grasp the thistle and spend money where it's needed, and make it known that this is a Scottish solution rather than a Westminster one. Yeah,
so would you say then that this is quite a regressive step then in devolution in Scotland?
Yes, because basically money should be spent by people that are close to where the money is being spent. The further away that power is, then the more likely the money is not going to be spent wisely. The money which used to come from the EU and is now hopefully going to come from Westminster should be given to the Scottish Government for them to decide how to administer it. And if the Scottish Government could then make it so that councils are then given more control to spend that money, then that would be even better again, because it's getting closer and closer to the voter, to constituents, and where the people that this money is being spent for and spent upon. So the closer that, if Westminster could see that logic, then that would be a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, could this funding also lead to further confusion? I mean, for instance, there's a real potential for devolved administrations competing with the UK government on the same initiatives. So who deals with employment and training and advertising these kind of projects?
I don't think that should be so much of a problem, because if we look back to how the situation was when we were still in the European Union, so money would come to Scotland from the EU, it would be spent by the Scottish Government, and people seem to understand that. It was known that was how the situation was. We would pay money into the EU via Westminster, and the money would come back to some degree, and that worked well. So the fact that this money will be coming from Westminster, I don't think that in itself is a problem. I think the problem is going to lie in where Westminster decides to spend the money, because I'm almost certain that they will not want to spend it where we would want to spend it. They will spend it where they think that it should best be spent, and those are not the same thing. Where we would like to see the money spent and where they actually spend it, I think will turn out to be two completely different things. But I don't think it would be a problem in the sense that you were perhaps anticipating. It's the end result that's going to be the problem.
Yeah, I mean, and could this lead to some tensions? I mean, particularly if voters think the UK SPF is showcasing the benefits of the Union. I mean, there could be difficulties in other devolved nations too, like Northern Ireland, for example, and not just Scotland.
Yes, I think that this is it's going to be a good example of how Westminster might think that this is going to be a good idea and it will win them praise and plaudits, but in reality, I think the opposite will be the case, because I don't think they really do understand Scotland or what is going on here or what we require. So when they decide where money should be spent, it probably won't strengthen the union. I think it will strengthen the separation or the dissolution of the union. In terms of Northern Ireland, there's so much at stake there. Whatever applies to Scotland and Wales will almost certainly apply to Northern Ireland, but in Northern Ireland there's the risk of returning to the Troubles and a military presence perhaps in the north, where there shouldn't be, as there hasn't been now since the Good Friday Agreement, and all of that could be at risk.
Yeah, no, we'll have to just wait and see, I suppose, yeah. Well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is that the WM Committee says Boris Johnson's levelling up plan lacks definition and planning. Boris Johnson's plan to level up depressed areas of the UK to close the gap with London and the South East risks becoming everything and a nothing policy that lacks definition, coordination and planning, according to an all-party group of MPs. In a report in progress towards boosting regional health and economic activity, MPs said the government needed to come forward with coherent proposals with more detail about the outcome communities could expect from a levelling up agenda and how success will be measured. The Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee said that while it understood the pressure on ministers during the pandemic, it was alarmed at the slow progress towards developing the economic policy, raising concerns that the levelling up agenda will fail to deliver meaningful change for people across the country. A white paper is due in the autumn, setting out how the government will push ahead with extra spending and investment to close income gaps across the UK. The BEIS committee report said that the government was unclear about whether the agenda extended to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, or just covered the regions of England. There was also a lack of coordination between departments as they developed initiatives directed at poorer regions. The report states, the current available documents show a wide-ranging and disjointed programme of random policies from an obscenity strategy, an increase in police officers to funding on A roads and the creation of free ports. Although these policies are all very interesting and welcome, it's difficult to see how they all tie together under one overarching strategy. The cohesion of the whole has not been well described to identify how these fit together. If the government is serious about levelling up and for it to be a substantive strategy rather than merely a slogan, it must spell out a coherent plan as a matter of urgency, the document added. The report found that disparities in income levels could be found within regions as well as between regions, which it said demanded a more sophisticated and nuanced response. The Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development said in 2016 that the UK had the 6th highest regional economic disparities among 30 member countries with comparable data. Brian, surely levelling up has to be more than just a soundbite.
It should be more than just a soundbite. You would like to think it would be more than just a soundbite. We're talking about people's livelihoods here. But as the word that you used a couple of times in your report was coherence, and that is absolutely, I think, what is going to be lacking. There will be no clarity when it comes to the how this is going to be delivered. Yes, levelling up. Again, it's the pork barrel politics. Money will go to wherever the Conservative Party thinks that it will result in more votes for them when it comes to any elections, whether they be local council elections or general elections. Again, and to talk about, it's unclear whether this is going to be for the whole of the United Kingdom or whether it is only going to be for England. Again, the fact that that's not clear just shows that there is no clarity, no leadership. And I wonder if, again, it's just that kind of mixed messaging. I wonder, does the Conservative Party think that because they've said that they're going to replace EU funding by spending money directly in Scotland without it going, so that they'll think, well, that's the same thing as levelling up, but it's not. It's just not very. There's no coherence, as you say.
Yeah, and with this incoherence, voters have to know in concrete terms what levelling up means. Do you think Boris Johnson himself knows what levelling up actually means? I think he knows how he wants it to sound. I think he knows that when he says things like that certain segments of the population will say, oh, that's a great idea, yes, I'll vote for you. But whether he has any intention of genuinely levelling up in a fair manner, I very much doubt. I think that what's going to happen is maybe it should be a 3-word slogan rather than as they keep giving us new 3-word slogans. It's empty rhetoric, I suppose, is the phrase that I'm searching for. Again, I would like to think that the current Westminster government had performed in such a way that we could trust them. If they had been honest and fair in the way that they've handled the problems that we're facing at the moment, then perhaps I would say, well, yeah, perhaps there will be some genuine levelling up, but no, I think it's empty phrases. Yeah. And do you think he'll be forced to be more coherent in his response? Do you think eventually people would be like, no, we want to know exactly what this means?
I don't know, because again, you try and follow politics, and you think, why are the Conservatives still so far in the opinion polls? Why can't people see through this? It sounds, at the risk I'm sounding patronising, but I would say maybe naive. What can I say? There's something about other key workers also. No, forget that. It's
problem.
how can I answer your question? It's a good one. I don't. Maybe you want to move on.
So we can go on to the next story. That is fine. So that we'll move on to how an inquiry finds that Lex Greensill is given extraordinarily privileged number 10 access. The businessman Lex Greensill was given extraordinarily privileged access to Downing Street, while the government's process for managing lobbying is insufficiently transparent and allows access to a privileged few, a report into the Greensill lobbying scandal commissioned by the Prime Minister has concluded. The former Prime Minister David Cameron and the late Cabinet Secretary Jeremy Haywood have been criticised in the 141-page review drawn up by the City Solicitor Nigel Boardman. Cameron understated the nature of his relationship with Greensill when lobbying officials, the report said. A covering memo to the Prime Minister in 2012 points to Lord Haywood as the person primarily responsible for Greensill being given a role in government. Boardman was appointed in April to run an independent investigation into government contracts and lobbying involving a number of senior Conservative politicians, including Cameron, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, the MP and former Health Secretary Matt Hancock, and the peer Francis Mode. It appeared the supply chain financier Greensill had been given privileged access to Downing Street when Cameron was Prime Minister and Haywood was Cabinet Secretary. After leaving government, Cameron became an advisor to Greensill Capital and lobbied ministers, including Sunak, for access to government-backed loans. Questions remain as to why Lord Mode and current ministers appear to have escaped criticism, while Haywood, who died in 2018, has been criticised. His wife Suzanne Haywood has claimed Boardman should not have been in charge of the inquiry because of his close relationship with the government and the Conservative Party. He has been a non-executive director at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and is a former Tory party candidate. So Brian, the long-awaited report on Greensill Capital was published today in the last day of Parliament. Do you think that this is a coincidence or a blatant attempt to bury some negative news?
I actually think it's probably a coincidence. But having said that, when I watch the news or I listen to the news or if I read the news on a daily basis almost, I'm staggered at what I hear and what I find and what I learn. So I would say that basically you could pick any day to make this announcement, and you could probably say, is this an attempt to bury it? The fact it is the last day of Parliament in sitting, I'm going to go with coincidence. But at the same time, I had a thought and it's gone. At the same time, it's typical Conservative behaviour. It's not a surprise. I'm struggling to find that thought that was at the front of
Well, I've got another question for you,
okay.
And it's that, do you agree with Nigel Boardman, who's appointed by Boris Johnson, that Mr Cameron did not breach the current lobbying rules and his actions were not unlawful? Do you agree with that statement?
I'm sure that is the case, that the actions were not unlawful. I believe, from my understanding, that Cameron was found not to have broken any codes or any rules or any laws. That may well be the case, but that doesn't mean that it's right. Something can be within the law and yet can be unethical, and I would say that this definitely falls into that category. I remember when this news broke in the early days, and Cameron was good enough to appear in front of a committee to answer questions. He did so for a few hours. I think my theory is that he watched both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon do the same thing and thought, well, I can do that, and decided to sit in front of the committee. And when they asked questions about how much money he had been given, and they posited a figure that was in the public domain, and he said, "Oh no, it's nothing like that, nothing like that amount." The implication being that it was a lot less, but I remember sitting thinking it's probably a lot more. And I think so he answered the question by saying, "Oh, that's nowhere near the figure that I was paid."
Yeah.
But so again, just evasion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, given that Mr Cameron was paid more than £720,000 per year, which equates to £28,000 per day. I mean, how does that sit with the current Tory policy of giving NHS workers an extra £2 a week?
Yeah, apparently the contract or the agreement that Cameron had with the company was that he would work for them for 25 days for that sum of money. And as far as I can tell, that work only entailed to some emails going to his pals that were still in the cabinet. So apart from even working out it is £28,000 per day at that rate, I wonder how much that would work out per email or per text message, probably a lot more. I think it's disgraceful that he was earning so much money when his party refuses to pay the nurses, the NHS, more than the paltry offer that it's made already. It's abominable, and I would even go so far as to say that, of course, that the NHS workers should be given a decent pay rise after what they've been put through with the pandemic. But I would extend that. I think that it should start with the NHS and then very quickly spiral out to include refuse collectors, supermarket employees, all the people that stayed at their posts when everybody else was in lockdown. We heard so many people saying that that they hoped that after the pandemic something would change because people realised that these were the real key workers, the real frontline workers, and it weren't not the captains of industry and people that were making money in the City of London. But it seems very quickly that people seem to have forgotten that. And certainly in the government and in the Conservative government, they seem very happy just to go back to the old norm of underfunding or giving paltry pay rises to people that work in the public sector. And again, I wonder if it's part of a plan, a long-term plan, to make the NHS fail and then say, oh, look, it isn't working, so the option is to privatise it. So it's perhaps a step on that road, but again, call me a cynic.
So that,
I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is that supermarkets struggle to stock shelves. And is this COVID or Brexit? Supermarkets are under increasing pressure to keep shelves fully stocked. Retail industry leaders have warned as the growing havoc wreaked by the pandemic continues to force thousands of workers to self-isolate. With shops in some areas suffering shortages and firms in sectors from petrol stations to the postal service affected by absences, the government is being urged to include supermarket staff, lorry drivers and other further frontline workers on a list of those exempted from self-isolation rules. The government has announced that certain industries will be able to apply for staff exemptions, allowing critical workers who are pinged by the NHS Test and Trace app to return to work after a PCR test and undertake daily lateral flow tests rather than self-isolating for 10 days. But it is yet to publish a list of which sectors can take part in the scheme, and there will not be a list of critical workers exempt from automatic self-isolation. Instead, exemptions will be considered on a case-by-case basis. Comparisons with the situation in Europe has revealed that supermarkets in EU countries are not experiencing the same supply chain issues, and there have been suggestions that the widespread reporting of the pandemic is to divert attention from the labour problems being caused by Brexit, including shortage of farm workers, food processing factory workers and HGV drivers. EU-based haulage companies are now also declining to operate in the UK because of the Brexit red tape. So, Brian, do you think Britain's supermarket food shortages is a result of Brexit or COVID?
Brexit, absolutely, clearly and without any ambiguity, it's Brexit. COVID clearly is in the mix, and COVID doesn't help. To be going through a pandemic so soon after leaving the European Union is a catastrophic combination of events. But I think even if the pandemic hadn't happened, and if we weren't currently still in a pandemic, I think we would still be experiencing shortages here in this country. So not in France, not in Germany, not in Ireland, in the south of the border.
So Brexit is the cause, and COVID is maybe exacerbating this cause.
Absolutely, it's clear, tangible causes, and mainly it seems that it's the heavy goods vehicles drivers that seem to be the most obvious or the most glaring example. The fact that so many of our heavy goods vehicle drivers, HGV drivers, used to come from the EU, and now they've all gone back to nations of their birth or home back to or somewhere within the EU, leaving us short. Apparently, we were already going to be experiencing a shortage, even if we hadn't left, because a lot of British born. It's definitely Brexit.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And food prices in UK supermarkets and shops have risen by 8.3% since January, and combined with food shortages, how is this going to affect people, especially people with monetary or dietary issues and needs?
I think that it's, again, I don't know how many times I've said this on this programme. I think every time I've been on here, I've said it's going to lead to more food bank use. If there's no food in the shops, and if people are struggling financially because their furlough is being removed, then I think they'll have no option but to go to food banks. And again, every time I think about food banks, then I think about Conservative MPs who would turn up at the opening of a new food bank in their community for a photo opportunity, talk about it as if it's an amenity. And food banks are not amenities, they're a disgrace. And I think that's, again, we're going to have to rely on more of them.
Yeah, well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is that the UK minister tells EU Brexit deal wasn't going to last forever. Speaking on Sky News today, UK Government Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng said that the European Union has been inflexible over renegotiating the Northern Ireland part of the Brexit divorce accord and cautioned Brussels that it was not a deal that would last forever. Mr Kwarteng said that a deal is a deal, but it wasn't something that was going to last forever, adding that he saw the deal as something that was flexible, which he wanted to make work more smoothly. Talking about Article 16, Mr Kwarteng said, "It is something that we could do, to suspend it. We've chosen not to do that. That's not our opening position, and we want to be able to negotiate and have a conversation with the EU about how best to go forward." The UK government yesterday demanded that the EU agree to rewrite the Northern Ireland Protocol, which covers post-Brexit trade involving the province just a year after it was agreed. The EU immediately rejected that call, saying the UK needed to respect its international obligations and pointed out it had been negotiated by Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Businesses in Northern Ireland say it is damaging trade, and some loyalist groups have protested at what they say is a weakening of ties with Britain, raising concerns about the threat of a return to the violence which plagued the Northern Ireland for 3 decades. So is it beyond the wit of the UK government to align with EU food standards, which are internationally considered very high and robust, and therefore they're curtailing the numerous problems being experienced currently in Northern Ireland?
It would seem to be beyond the wit of the government to maintain food standards, yes. What can I say? And again, I mean, the minister is correct when he said nothing lasts forever. But the pyramids one day will crumble. One day the Alps will turn to dust. I think there's some song lyrics coming into my mind here. But you'd like to think that an international agreement that's been signed by the government it might not last forever, but you'd like to think it would last more than a few weeks or a couple of months. And already the government, they signed this agreement, they entered into this international contract, and now they're trying to get out of it. The EU has been incredibly patient. I couldn't have been so patient, as you can probably tell from my performance here this evening. But it's just for Boris Johnson to have said there will be no border in the Irish Sea, and now there is a border in the Irish Sea, and told businessmen in the north of Ireland that if anybody asks for any contracts in it, to just put them in the bin, send them to him, and he will tear them up. It's incredible how complacent they've been.
And do you think that the British government's kind of command paper to change protocol, do you think that's a deliberate escalation?
It seems to be that idea that they have this idea of exceptionalism, that they can do whatever they want, and yet it's a contract. I mean, take something like the border. There are two sides to every border, and both those sides have to be managed. And so you're talking about the relationship along the border between Britain outside the EU and countries that are inside the EU. And it seems to me that at every turn the EU have been kind and patient but firm, and so they seemed they're willing to stand up to Westminster, which is a good thing in my book. No matter how hard Westminster kicks and struggles against what they have agreed and what they have signed up to, the EU definitely seem to, they have all the cards, and they seem to be willing and able to say, no, we won't let you get away with that. And I think that's what's causing the noises that we're hearing from Westminster at the moment, well, certainly from the Conservative government at the moment in Westminster. I probably could go on, but time is probably...
I mean, you can if you want to, yeah, if you've got more to say.
No,
Not to pressure you to say more.
It's just, it is something that you said earlier on is like, oh, I've let you down again. I'm sorry.
Not at all, not at all. Well, we can move on to the next story, if you would like. And that is that the UK government offers 3% pay rise to NHS staff in England, while study shows they have lost thousands in real pay since 2011. Nurses look set to reject the 3% NHS England award as too low, and many take industrial action in protest. Other health unions also plan to ballot their memberships over possible strike action. Following a day of confusion and rising tensions, the UK government dropped plans to make only 1.5% of the 3% uplift a permanent increase to salaries, with the other 1.5% in effect a one-off bonus. It came after staff groups warned privately that they would condemn any deal structured that way. However, the decision to exclude the NHS's 61,000 junior doctors, all medics below the level of consultant, from the pay award is certain to cause deep unease among a key group of staff who undertook a series of strikes in 2015 and 2016 in protest at the proposed new contract. Commenting on the UK government's offer of a 3% pay rise for NHS England staff, the SNP's health spokesperson, Dr Philippa Whitford MP, contrasted the situation in Scotland, saying, "In Scotland we do more than just clap for our NHS, we reward them. That is why the SNP government has committed to investing record sums of money into our NHS and is offering staff a 4% pay rise, the biggest increase in the history of devolution." Dr Whitford said that the Tories at Westminster offered at first only a derisory 1% pay rise for those who had spent 18 months on the front line saving lives, and it seems they still cannot bring themselves to match the 4% offered by the Scottish Government. Dr Whitford pointed out that the UK Government can come up with billions of pounds to increase funding for weapons of mass destruction, undertake a luxury refurbishment of the No. 10 briefing room, as well as multiple vanity projects, including the Prime Minister's jet and a new royal boat, but not for the NHS. New research by a leading health think tank shows NHS staff in England have suffered real-term falls in their pay of up to £2,949 over the last decade. The findings are contained in a Health Foundation analysis of official NHS staff earnings data covering the 10 years from March 2011 to March this year. Overall, the 1.2 million staff in hospital and community services in England are £462 a year worse off than they were in 2011. That reflects a decade in which most NHS personnel received either a very small annual salary rise of about 1% or had their pay frozen. So, David, the 3% offer nurses is below the projected rate of inflation. I mean, is that really all that they're worth?
It's incredible. Again, when you think about what the NHS has gone through recently in terms of the pandemic, and as you say, it's been a long, slow decline in terms of wage levels in the NHS for many years. I take it that because you didn't mention whether in Scotland nurses and doctors' wages have declined over the years, I take it that means that the opposite is true, that they have benefited from Scottish Government policy. It's my first job when I left school was nursing. I went into the NHS and became a nurse and did that for about 10 years. And those doctors that you're saying that are being excluded from this, those are amongst the hardest working medical staff that there is. Those are the doctors that, if I was worried about a patient and in the middle of the night, and I would call for a doctor, then they would, come. That they would try to get some sleep, and then I would call them, and they would get up out of their beds in the hospital and then come to help. It's a disgrace, and as you say, they recently went on strike. They recently struck, if that's the correct phrase, to try and change the situation, and straight away public opinion turned against them. So I think they might be wary about any future strike action, but I'm a great believer in unions, and so I hope that they do.
Do you think that the unions will receive the necessary threshold? I think it's about 50% of the workers to go on strike.
I hope so. I can certainly understand why they might hesitate to go on strike. No medical sector, whether it be nurses, physiotherapists, people who clean the wards, people who work in the canteens in the hospitals, none of them should feel that they're forced to go on strike for a better or a living wage. The fact that they feel that they do have to means that there's a problem and that should be sorted. But I think they've, to coin a phrase, I think they do have all the cards. They do hold all the cards. If they were to threaten to go on strike, especially post-pandemic, I would like to think that the government would have no option but to cave in and meet their demands. So hopefully a strike wouldn't be the actual outcome, and they would get a proper pay increase across the board. And then, as I said earlier on, hopefully that would very quickly spiral outwards to people who work for city councils, refuse collectors, as I said before, people who work in supermarkets. These are the people who should be getting huge pay increases, not merchant bankers and the like. Yeah,
true. Well, it's true. We'll move on to the next story, and that is that scientists back COVID boosters. Scientists have backed proposals for COVID boosters in the autumn after blood tests of hundreds of people revealed that protective antibodies can wane substantially within weeks of second vaccine shots being given. Falls in antibodies after vaccination are expected and do not necessarily mean people are more vulnerable to disease, but the researchers are concerned that if the declines persist, the effectiveness of the vaccines may diminish. The UCL Virus Watch study found that antibodies generated by 2 doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca and the Pfizer BioNTech vaccines started to wane as early as 6 weeks after the second shot, in some cases falling more than 50% over 10 weeks. The researchers stress that both vaccines are extremely effective against COVID, but say the findings support plans for a booster campaign this autumn, particularly for those who were vaccinated early and with the Oxford AstraZeneca shot. So Brian, do you agree with the UCL Virus Watch research that a booster in autumn is advisable?
Yes, it seems like common sense to me. If the findings show that immunity is not permanent and starts to weaken quite early on, then it's common sense that we should have boosters. I've had my 2 AstraZeneca JAGs, and if and when the boosters start to be rolled out, then I'll be looking forward to my booster with the upcoming winter months, absolutely. So yes, I agree with them wholeheartedly. Yeah,
and do you think that less affluent countries across the globe should be given vaccines before we're administrating boosters here?
I'd be happy with that. If my JAG was delayed, my booster JAG was delayed so that somebody in a country which does not have such high levels of immunisation, if it was to go there, I'd be very happy for that to happen. I don't personally feel as if I'm at risk at the moment because I've been vaccinated. I agree with Angela Merkel and her statement recently, was it today or yesterday, that we recently found out that Germany they gave a lot of their allocated vaccinations to countries, other EU countries that were struggling, and they knew that it would slow down their vaccination rate, but they thought that was a good thing. It was a price worth paying, and now that they've done that, their vaccination rates are higher than ours. It's listening to epidemiologists. It's clear that with a pandemic, it is global. If there's no point in just being an island and vaccinating your own population and letting other countries and other continents have lower levels, because then you run the risk of variants.
Yeah.
And then, of course, your vaccinations have been rendered useless, and you've got another new ongoing wave in the pandemic. So, yeah, it's got to be international. We've got to work together. If one country has more than another, then yes, they should do their best to even up, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll move on to the next story, and that is that the Scottish Greens say Campbell contradicts climate goals. The Scottish Parliament is being challenged to recognise that the proposed Campbell oil field off the coast of Shetland would be incompatible with the UK and Scotland's climate targets and international obligations. A motion by Scottish Greens Environment spokesperson Mark Ruskell has been laid before Parliament, raising the International Energy Agency report on achieving net zero targets, which advise nations to halt investment in new oil and gas fields. Despite this, the UK government is expected to approve the Campbell oil field ahead of the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow this year. If approved, Campbell will produce 150 to 170 million barrels on top of what the North Sea already produces. It will operate until 2050, years after Scotland aims to hit net zero emissions, and well past the point at which it will be too late to contain global warming. So, Brian, do you think that the UK is truly wanting to achieve their net zero target by 2050? And do you think that we will achieve it with projects like this?
We won't achieve it if Campbell goes ahead. I don't think so. That oil needs to stay in the ground. There's no doubt about it. Instead of investing money in digging new oil wells or drilling new fields, that money and that effort and that time and that expertise should be going into renewables and green energy sources. There's no doubt about it. And the fact that Westminster is able to continue to give licences for drilling in new fields over and above the Scottish Parliament's wishes, I think says a lot about the way the UK is structured at the moment, and that's something that needs to be thought about.
Yeah, would the Campbell oil field in Shetland devalue Scotland's credibility this year with COP26?
I think there's a strong possibility that it would, but again, I would like to think that that other countries outside the UK would understand that this is a Westminster priority. It's not a Scottish government priority. I think anybody who's looking in and following British politics at the moment would probably be aware that if this was something that was devolved and not reserved, then it would be a completely different situation. So hopefully people will be able to see that it's not Scotland's fault and will not damage Scotland's reputation in that sense. Would be my hope, my aim.
Yeah. So there's also the argument that even if the Campbell oil field is rejected, there will still be a demand for oil and gas, and that we would have to import this from abroad, which would cause higher emissions. But so should the government then invest in projects to meet this demand, or should we be investing on how to lower this demand?
I think you're right. We will always need some oil, but I would like to think that at some point in the near future, the things that the oil is needed for will be for something where there's absolutely no other alternatives. So not energy, not just simply electricity or heating. So I'm thinking maybe high-end industrial tools or something that's used in medical procedures, such as catheters that are used during heart bypass operations. These are all probably going to be made from plastics, and plastics are made from oil. But I would like to think that that's the only time that we resort to oil, and that those would become something that was therefore a desirable resource for a nation to have, because those products would be expensive because it would be a rare use of fossil fuels. We should definitely be looking at finding out other ways to do things rather than opening up new oil fields.
I mean, the SNP has been urged by the Scottish Green and campaigners to formally oppose the plans. I mean, do you think they will? And if they did, what would this opposition do?
I don't know what they would do. I do hope they oppose it. I hope they make it very clear that they're against any new fields being opened up. I hope it's going to be an opportunity for the Greens and the SNP to collaborate and to work together, as they've stated that they would like to do. So this could be the ideal opportunity to show that they can do that. It's when you look at what's going on, what's happening in Germany at the moment in terms of the catastrophes due to climate change, it's clear that we've got to do something now. Yeah. And that oil has got to stay in the ground.
Yeah, time is running out. So, yeah, well, we'll move on to our last story of this evening, and that is that work begins to uncover secrets of Viking burial site discovered in Orkney. Historic Environment Scotland is funding post-excavation analysis on 2 recently discovered Viking graves that may form part of a previously unknown cemetery uncovered in Orkney to unlock stories of Viking life in Scotland over 1,000 years ago. In 2015, human remains were discovered on the northeast coast of Papa Westray, Orkney. Further investigation determined that these discoveries were in fact the remains of Viking-age burials. Excavations revealed a number of significant finds, including evidence of a rare Viking boat burial and a second grave richly furnished with weapons, including a sword. Similarities with the type of burials and grave furnishings to those previously uncovered suggest that Papa Westray graves may be those of first-generation Norwegian settlers on Orkney. Archaeologists from AOC Archaeology are now working to analyse the discovery using a range of cutting-edge scientific techniques with the hope of gaining new insights into the life and death of the Viking community in Orkney during the 10th century. The project will include a detailed programme of osteological work and radiocarbon dating to help determine the age of the remains, as well as expert conservation and analysis on the grave artefacts that were unearthed. HES will also be working with the Ancient Genome Project to undertake genetic analysis of the discoveries to determine further information about the individuals in the graves, including genetic ancestry and sex, as well as to gain information on their diet and mobility. So, Brian, I mean, do you think that the number of tourism could increase with a discovery such as this?
I don't see why not. Yes, I mean, people already go to Orkney and Shetland for the likes of Scapa Flow and Scarabray, and it's I know this isn't what the question is about, but it just shows that there's always been immigration to Scotland, and in my view that's a good thing. That might not have always been a peaceful example, but still, I think it's great. It means that we'll be able to find out more about who we are and where we've all come from, what makes us Scots that we are today.
I mean, Dr. Ciara Clark has said that the programme will help us to understand these individuals, their lives and their culture. I mean, do you think this will actually affect our own current Scottish culture, perhaps identity? Or
it's. I can't help thinking about, again, it's not what the story's about, but I can't help thinking about even Scotland is closer to the Nordic countries and to Iceland than England, not just geographically, but I think also perhaps culturally, and it feeds into that. And in terms of geology, what we call Scotland actually originally, if you go back far enough, was part of the same landmass that Greenland and Iceland came from, whereas what we now call England and Wales was part of the continental shelf, which is France and Germany, and then Scotland and England were pushed together to form the island that we live on now. So it's this is just almost like another fascinating layer that comes in over the top of that. I think it just shows that how rich Scotland was at that time, and people wanted to come here for obvious reasons, I suppose.
I mean, do you think that the Orkney community might be sparked with some new interest in some history or ancestors?
More of up Helliah festivals and the like. It kind of makes all of that make more sense. And another reason to go there and to see it. It's a good thing. Yeah, absolutely, it's a good thing. Any kind of research and discoveries like this are good news. Yeah, and who knows what will come up tomorrow.
That's true. Who knows? Who knows what the next discovery will be?
Yeah, what else is remains hidden and yet to come to light? Although again, maybe there's a reason to bring in climate change here, because it's again, it's good that they've discovered that before, because there's a lot of land erosion around our coastline, especially in Orkney. So it's a good thing that was this new discovery was made before that land was lost. And so again, another bonus.
Another bonus.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, that is all for this evening. So thank you, Brian, for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for your patience with me.
No problem. And thank you to everyone watching at home. If you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland, then just follow the link at the bottom of your screen just now. Thanks again for watching.